My name is Claire Whitfield. I'm 31 years old. You're not even real family, so stop pretending you belong here. That's what my mother said to me at my own father's funeral, in front of 43 people, while I was still holding the eulogy I'd written the night before, with shaking hands. She said it because my stepsister Whitney whispered something in her ear. Something that wasn't true. Something that would cost me 6 years of my life, my home, my name in that town, and very nearly my sanity. What my mother didn't know was that my father's best friend was standing right behind her, and he recorded every word. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before I tell you what happened at that funeral, and what happened 6 years later, when I walked back into the place I swore I'd never return to, I need you to understand the family I came from, because it didn't break overnight. It cracked slowly, over years, the way a foundation splits when no one bothers to fix it. I grew up in Ridley Falls, Ohio. Small town, population 8,000, the kind of place where everybody knows your car before they know your face. My father, Thomas Whitfield, was a mechanic, owned a two-bay shop on Carroll Street called Whitfield Auto. He smelled like engine grease and lava soap every single day of his life, and I loved that smell more than anything in the world. He taught me to change a tire when I was 9, taught me to check oil at 10. By 12, I could bleed brakes better than most adults. He used to say, "Claire Bear, you don't need anyone to rescue you, you just need the right wrench." My mother, Donna, was different. She married my father when she was 20, and I think she spent the next 25 years wishing she hadn't. She wanted a bigger house, a better zip code, a husband who wore a tie instead of coveralls. She never said it out loud, not exactly, but you could feel it in the way she flinched when he kissed her cheek at church with grease still under his nails. In the way she introduced herself at school events as Donna, never Tom's wife. When I was 14, my parents separated for a year. During that year, my mother dated a man named Gerald Price, a regional sales manager for a pharmaceutical company. Gerald drove a silver Lexus and wore cologne that made my eyes water. He had a daughter from his first marriage, Whitney Price, blonde, 16, captain of the dance team, the kind of girl who smiled at adults and destroyed you behind their backs. My parents got back together. Gerald and my mother ended things. But the damage was done, because my mother had fallen in love with the life Gerald represented, and she never stopped comparing. And Whitney, who had spent that year living in our guest room every other weekend, had carved out a space in my mother's heart that I didn't even know was available. Here's what you need to understand. When Gerald moved to Michigan for work, Whitney chose to stay in Ridley Falls for her senior year. My mother offered to let her finish the school year at our house. My father agreed because my father agreed to everything my mother wanted. Whitney never left. She graduated, got a job at the county clerk's office, and somehow just kept living in our guest room. My mother treated her like the daughter she wished she'd had. Whitney wore the right clothes, said the right things, laughed at my mother's jokes, and never once came home smelling like engine grease. I went to nursing school, 4 years at Ohio State, graduated with honors, got a job at a hospital in Columbus, an hour and a half from Ridley Falls. I drove home every other weekend to see my dad. We'd sit in the shop on Saturday mornings, drink terrible coffee from a pot that hadn't been cleaned since the Clinton administration, and talk about nothing important. Those mornings were everything to me. My mother rarely joined us. She and Whitney would be at brunch, or shopping, or at some event at the church where Whitney had somehow become the youngest member of the Women's Ministry Board. Whitney called my mother Mama D. My mother called Whitney my bonus daughter. She posted photos of them together on Facebook with captions like, "My girl's day out," and "This one makes me so proud." I was never in those photos, not once. I told myself it didn't matter. I had my dad. I had my career. I had a life in Columbus that didn't depend on my mother's approval. And that was true. But it was also true that every time I saw those photos, something inside me tightened, a fist I couldn't unclench. Then my father got sick. Pancreatic cancer, diagnosed late, the way it always is. By the time they found it, he had maybe 6 months. I requested a leave of absence from the hospital and moved back to Ridley Falls to take care of him. I set up his medications, managed his appointments, slept on a cot in his bedroom so I could monitor him at night. I was there every single day for 4 months. Whitney was there too, but differently. She'd stop by for 30 minutes, bring flowers, take a photo with my father, post it online, praying for this incredible man. 47 likes. My mother would sit in the living room watching television while I changed his IV bag upstairs. When I came down, she'd say, "Whitney brought those beautiful sunflowers. Wasn't that thoughtful?" I changed his sheets. I cleaned his wounds. I held the basin when he couldn't keep food down. But Whitney brought sunflowers. My father died on a Tuesday morning in October. I was holding his hand. My mother was in the kitchen on the phone with the florist, planning the funeral arrangements. She didn't come upstairs until I walked down and told her. She looked at me and said, "Well, I suppose we need to call people." Not "I'm sorry," not "Are you okay?" Not "He loved you, Claire." She said, "I suppose we need to call people." The funeral was 3 days later at Grace Hill Methodist, the church on Birch Avenue where I'd been baptized. My father's shop guys were there, his fishing buddies, neighbors, old customers, people who'd known Thomas Whitfield their whole lives. I wrote the eulogy. I spent all night on it, sitting on my father's side of the bed, writing on a yellow legal pad because he hated computers. My mother asked Whitney to do a reading. A Bible verse. Something about eternal rest. Whitney practiced it in the bathroom mirror. I heard her rehearsing through the wall, adjusting her pauses, modulating her voice. She even asked my mother which dress looked more somber but elegant. The service started. Whitney did her reading. She cried at exactly the right moment. My mother reached up from the front pew and squeezed her hand. It was a beautiful performance. Then it was my turn. I stood up, walked to the podium, unfolded the yellow legal pad, and began. I got through maybe a minute before it happened. I was talking about Saturday mornings in the shop, about bad coffee and brake fluid and my father's hands, when my voice broke, just for a second. I paused, took a breath, and kept going. After the service, people gathered in the fellowship hall. Sandwiches, coffee, the usual. I was standing near the back, accepting condolences, when I saw my mother and Whitney in the corner, heads together, whispering. Then my mother walked toward me. Her face was set, that particular expression she wore when she'd made a decision and nothing on earth would change it. "Claire, we need to talk about the will. Not beautiful eulogy. Not your father would have been proud. The will. Dad's lawyer is handling it, Mom. We'll go through it next week. Whitney told me something and I need to hear it from you." I looked at Whitney, standing 3 feet behind my mother, with her arms crossed and her chin tucked, the posture of someone pretending to be hurt. "What did she tell you?" My mother lowered her voice, but not enough. The people nearest us could hear every word. "She said you've been pressuring your father to cut me out of the will. She said you've been meeting with his lawyer behind my back for months, trying to redirect everything to yourself." I couldn't speak. Not because it was true, because it was so far from true that my brain couldn't process how to respond. "Mom, that's insane. I've been taking care of him. I haven't talked to any lawyer." Whitney has no reason to lie. Whitney has every reason to lie. She's been living in your house for free for 10 years. And that's when my mother said it. Loud enough for the people around us to hear, clear enough that there was no misunderstanding. "You're not even real family, so stop pretending you belong here." I stared at her. She stared back. Behind her, Whitney dabbed her eyes with a tissue. I folded the eulogy, put it in my coat pocket, and walked out of the fellowship hall, through the parking lot, past my father's friends who were smoking near the side entrance, into my car, and I drove. I didn't go back to the house. I drove straight to Columbus, packed my apartment in 3 days, and took a travel nursing contract in North Carolina, then another one in Oregon, then another in Vermont. I moved every 6 months for 2 years, and then I stopped in a small coastal town in Maine called Port Carver, and I stayed. I changed my phone number. I deactivated every social media account. I told no one from Ridley Falls where I was. I let myself be erased because the alternative was staying visible to people who made me wish I was invisible. For 6 years, I built a life in Port Carver. I got a permanent position at the community hospital. I ran a free blood pressure clinic at the senior center on Wednesdays. I adopted a dog named Biscuit, a one-eared beagle with terrible breath and no respect for personal space. I made friends, real ones, people who showed up not because of obligation, but because they wanted to. But every October, on the anniversary of my father's death, I'd drive to the cemetery where he was buried, 4 hours each way. I'd sit on the grass, talk to him, tell him about my patients, about Biscuit, about the lobster rolls at the place near the harbor. I never told anyone I made those trips. I went alone and came home alone. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't learn for 6 more years, was that someone else visited that grave. Someone who left something behind every time, and someone who had been looking for me since the day I disappeared. It was my father's best friend, a man named Earl Stokes, 68 years old, retired electrician, the kind of man who says 12 words a day and means all of them. He and my father had been inseparable since high school. Earl was the one who helped my dad open the shop. He was the one who drove him to his first chemo appointment when my mother said she had a hair appointment. Earl had been standing behind my mother at the funeral when she said those words to me. He'd been 3 feet away, close enough to hear everything, and he'd had his phone in his hand because he'd been recording parts of the service to send to my father's brother in Arizona who couldn't travel. The recording caught my mother's voice perfectly. Every word, every syllable, including Whitney's whisper that started it all. But Earl didn't use it. Not then. He held on to it the way my father would have, quietly, carefully, waiting for the moment it would matter. Because Earl knew something about Donna Whitfield. He knew she'd keep going. She always kept going. And she did. Within a month of the funeral, my mother told everyone in Ridley Falls that I had forged my father's will. She told them I had stolen money from his business account while he was dying. She told them I had been emotionally abusing him during his final months and that she had to intervene to protect him. She told them I fled town because I was guilty. None of it was true. Not a word. But she said it with tears in her eyes and Whitney nodding beside her, and people believed it because they'd known Donna for 30 years and because I wasn't there to say otherwise. Whitney moved into the master bedroom of my childhood home. My mother gave her my father's truck, the navy blue Ford he'd driven for 15 years. Whitney started posting photos from the truck with captions like, "Riding with Angels. Miss you, Papa Tom." Earl saw all of it. He told me later that he tried calling my old number, tried reaching me through the hospital in Columbus, even drove there once. But I was already gone, so he waited. He visited my father's grave every month, left a small American flag because my dad had served in the army, and he kept that recording on his phone like a man keeping a loaded weapon in a safe. 6 years passed. Then, one evening in March, I was closing up the blood pressure clinic at the senior center in Port Carver when my phone rang. Unknown number, Ohio area code. I almost didn't answer. "Claire? Claire Whitfield? Who is this?" "It's Earl. Earl Stokes. Don't hang up." I sat down on the folding chair so hard it nearly collapsed. "Earl. How did you find me?" "Your dad's lawyer. He wouldn't give me your address, but he agreed to pass along my number if I told him why." "Why are you calling?" A pause. The kind of pause that holds weight. "Your mother is selling the shop, Claire. Whitfield Auto. She's signing the papers next Friday, and there's something you need to know before she does." My stomach dropped. My father's shop. The 2-bay garage on Carroll Street where I learned to change a tire, where I drank terrible coffee on Saturday mornings, where the last purely good memories of my childhood lived. "She can't sell it. Dad left it to me." "That's exactly what I need to talk to you about. And Claire, there's more. There's a lot more. Can I come to you?" Earl drove 9 hours from Ohio to Maine. He showed up at my apartment on a Thursday evening with a manila folder, a thermos of coffee, and a face that looked like it had been carrying something heavy for 6 years. He sat at my kitchen table, and he told me everything. He told me that the will my father filed with his lawyer, the real will, left the shop to me. It left the house to my mother. The savings split evenly between us, and a small life insurance policy designated for my education loans. Whitney was not mentioned anywhere in the document. But 3 weeks after the funeral, a new will appeared. Filed by a different attorney, dated 2 months before my father's death, during the period when he was heavily medicated and barely conscious. This will left everything to my mother with full discretion. Whitney was named as a beneficiary of the life insurance. I don't believe your father signed that second will, Earl said. And neither does his original lawyer. Then Earl reached into the manila folder and pulled out his phone. He played the recording from the funeral. My mother's voice, sharp and clear. Whitney's whisper before it. And then the words that had driven me out of my own life. I've kept this for 6 years, Earl said. Because I made a promise to your father before he died. He told me, Earl, if anything happens, look after my Claire bear. She won't ask for help, so you'll have to find her yourself. I pressed my hands against my face. Biscuit pushed his head into my lap like he knew. There's one more thing. Earl set a small box on the table. Inside was a stack of envelopes, 11 of them, each one addressed to me in my father's handwriting. He wrote these during his last 2 months. One for each year he hoped you'd be gone, plus one extra. He gave them to me and said, "Give these to Claire when it's time." I opened the first envelope. The letter inside was short, written in pencil, the handwriting shaky from medication. I won't read you the whole thing. That's mine. But the last line said, "The shop is yours. Don't let anyone take it, and don't let anyone tell you that you don't belong." I opened every envelope that night. 11 letters spanning 11 imagined years of my life. In letter 4, he congratulated me on a promotion he guessed I'd earn. In letter 7, he joked about my cooking. In letter 9, he told me he was sorry he married a woman who couldn't see what was right in front of her. In letter 11, the last one, he wrote, "If Earl found you, then I kept my promise." Even from here, Earl sat across from me while I read. He didn't say a word. He just drank his coffee and let me have the silence. "What do you want me to do?" I asked him when I finished. "Your mother is hosting a memorial fundraiser at the church next Friday. She's calling it the Thomas Whitfield Community Spirit Award. She's giving a speech about your father's legacy and then announcing the sale of the shop. The buyer is a developer who wants to tear it down and build condos. A fundraiser. In my father's name. Organized by the woman who couldn't be bothered to walk upstairs when he died. Whitney is being presented as the family representative to accept the award on behalf of the family. If you're listening to this, I want you to pause and think. If your father built something with his hands, poured 30 years of his life into it, and someone was about to erase it while using his name as decoration, what would you do? Drop a comment. I want to know. And if this story means something to you, hit subscribe, because what I did next is something I'd been building toward for 6 years without knowing it. I drove to Ridley Falls. 9 hours with Biscuit in the back seat and Earl's manila folder on the passenger side. I arrived on Thursday night and checked into a motel on Route 9, the one with the blinking vacancy sign that had been blinking since I was a kid. Friday evening, Grace Hill, Methodist. The same church where my father's funeral was held. The same fellowship hall where my mother told me I wasn't real family. I parked across the street and sat in my car for 5 minutes. My hands were steady. My breathing was even. I wasn't nervous. I was ready. The hall was full, maybe 60 people. Folding tables with white tablecloths, a banner that read, "The Thomas Whitfield Community Spirit Award," and a blown-up photo of my father from 20 years ago, smiling in his coveralls, standing in front of the shop. Someone had put flowers around the frame. Sunflowers. Whitney's signature. I walked in through the back entrance. I wore my scrubs under my coat. Not on purpose, exactly, but I'd come straight from a shift and hadn't changed, and there was something right about it. My father raised a woman who works with her hands. That felt like the right thing to wear. I found a seat in the last row. The same row I'd been assigned my whole life. My mother was at the front table. 63 now, silver hair, a black dress with a pearl necklace that I recognized as the one my father had given her on their 20th anniversary. She was laughing with the woman beside her, touching her arm the way she does. Whitney sat next to her, 33, polished, wearing a dress that probably cost what I make in a week. She had a folder in front of her, the speech she'd prepared. Pastor David Chen, who had replaced the old pastor 2 years ago, stood and welcomed everyone. He spoke briefly about community, about legacy, about how one man's work could ripple outward for generations. Then he introduced my mother. Donna walked to the podium. She gripped the edges, looked out at the audience, and began. Thomas Whitfield was the love of my life. I watched 60 people nod. When we lost him 6 years ago, I didn't know how to go on. But this community carried me. You brought meals. You sent cards. You reminded me that Tom's spirit lives in this town. She paused, dabbed her eye. Tonight, we honor that spirit. And I'm so grateful to have Whitney here, who was like a daughter to Tom, to help carry this forward. Whitney stood, walked to the podium, and opened her folder. She began reading a speech about my father's generosity, about how he taught her to check the oil in her car, about Saturday mornings in the shop. Saturday mornings in the shop. My Saturday mornings. My memories. Repurposed, polished, and delivered by a woman who spent those mornings at brunch with my mother. Whitney finished to applause. My mother embraced her. The audience clapped. Someone said, Tom would be so proud. That's when I stood up. I didn't rush. I didn't shout. I walked down the center aisle the way I walk into a patient's room when I have difficult news. Calm, steady, present. My mother saw me first. Her smile didn't fade. It froze. Whitney grabbed my mother's arm. Good evening, I said. I didn't use the podium. I just stood in the aisle, close enough for everyone to hear. My name is Claire Whitfield. Thomas Whitfield was my father. The room went quiet. I haven't been here in 6 years. Some of you might remember me. Some of you might remember what you were told about me. I looked at my mother. She was gripping the edge of the table. I didn't steal from my father. I didn't forge his will. I didn't abandon my family. I left this town because 3 hours after my father's funeral, standing in this building, my mother told me in front of a room full of people that I wasn't real family. A murmur, heads turning. That's a lie, my mother said. Her voice was controlled, but her knuckles were white. It's not. I turned to the room. And I can prove it. Earl stood up from the second to last row. He walked forward with his phone in his hand, and he played the recording. The church hall had good acoustics. Every word was clear. My mother's voice, sharp and unmistakable. Whitney's whisper before it, the one that started everything. And then the sentence that had defined the last 6 years of my life. The room heard it. All of them. The same people who had been told I was a thief, a liar, a woman who exploited her dying father. They heard the truth in my mother's own voice. My mother stood. That's taken out of context. I was grieving. You can't judge someone for what they say at a funeral. You weren't grieving when you filed a second will 3 weeks later, I said. A will my father never signed. A will that removed me from everything he built. I held up the manila folder. My father's original will, verified by his attorney, leaves the shop to me. The second will appeared after his death, filed by a different lawyer, dated during a period when my father was on morphine and couldn't hold a pen. The murmuring grew louder. And the letters. Earl's voice was rough, the way it gets when he's saying something that costs him. Tom gave me 11 letters for Claire, handwritten. 1 for each year he thought she'd be gone. He knew what was coming. He knew Donna would rewrite the story. A woman in the third row stood. Margaret Holt, my father's bookkeeper for 20 years. I prepared Tom's financial records. He never changed his will in my presence. And he told me in August, 2 weeks before he passed, that the shop was Claire's. Another voice. Ray Dominguez, one of the shop guys. Tom talked about Claire every day. Every single day. He never once mentioned Whitney getting anything. My mother looked around the room the way a person looks for an exit when there isn't one. Whitney was already gathering her purse. This is a setup, my mother said. You planned this. You came here to humiliate me. I came here because you're selling my father's shop. A shop he built with his hands and left to me. And you're doing it under a banner with his name on it while the woman who lied about me at his funeral gives a speech about Saturday mornings she never spent with him. Whitney stopped moving. Every head turned toward her. Whitney told you I was trying to steal the will, I said. She whispered it to you at the funeral. It's on the recording. But Whitney had a reason. Because 3 months before my father died, he told me he'd discovered that $15,000 had been withdrawn from the shop account. Check signed by someone with access to the business checkbook. I paused. Whitney had been working part-time doing the shop's billing since the year before. My father confronted her privately. He didn't want to involve my mother. He thought he could handle it quietly. Whitney's face went white. He couldn't. Because Whitney went to my mother first and told her I was the one pressuring him about money. She got ahead of the truth. And my mother believed her, because my mother has always believed her. The room was silent except for the hum of the fluorescent lights. My mother turned to Whitney. For the first time in the 6 years I'd been gone, and maybe for the first time ever, I saw doubt on my mother's face. Whitney grabbed her purse and walked toward the side door without saying a word. She didn't deny it. She didn't explain. She just left. The door closed behind her with a sound like a period at the end of a sentence. My mother stood alone at the front of the room. 60 people watching. No script. No Whitney. No performance left to give. "Claire," she said. Her voice had changed. Smaller. "I'm not done," I said. "I'm not selling the shop. I'm reopening it. In my father's name. The real one. And I'll be here every Saturday morning." I looked at Earl. He nodded once. I turned and walked back up the aisle toward the door. Behind me, I heard Margaret say, "Donna, I think you owe your daughter more than you've given her." I didn't hear my mother's response. I was already outside, standing in the parking lot under a sky full of stars, breathing air that smelled like Ohio in early spring, like wet earth and gasoline and the faintest trace of lava soap that was probably just my imagination but felt completely real. 2 weeks later, I moved back to Ridley Falls. Not to the house I grew up in. I rented a small apartment above the hardware store on Main Street. Biscuit adjusted immediately. He has that kind of personality. The shop was in rough shape. 6 years of neglect, dust on every surface, tools scattered, the coffee pot still sitting on the counter exactly where my father had left it. I cleaned it in 3 days. Earl helped. Ray Dominguez came back. Margaret offered to do the books again. I reopened Whitfield Auto on a Saturday morning. I put a sign in the window that said, "Under Original Management." My mother came to see me once, 3 weeks after the fundraiser. She stood in the doorway of the shop, looked around, and said, "Your father would have wanted us to move past this." "My father wanted me to have this shop," I said. "What do you want, Mom?" She didn't answer. She stood there for a long moment, then turned and left. Whitney moved to Michigan to live with her biological father. I heard this from Margaret, who heard it from the clerk's office. I don't think about her much. She was never the real problem. Donna still lives in the house on Maple Lane. She still goes to church. She still hosts dinners. But the guest list is shorter now. And when people ask about me, she says, "Claire's at the shop." That's all. No story, no tears, no performance. Just, "Claire's at the shop." It's not an apology. I don't know if it ever will be. But it's the first true thing she's said about me in 6 years, and I'll take it for now. Last Saturday, Earl stopped by the shop at 7 in the morning. He brought coffee from the diner, the good kind, not the sludge from the pot. He sat in my father's chair, the one with the duct tape on the armrest, and he told me a story about the time my dad accidentally welded his own boot to a fender in 1994. I laughed until I cried. The morning light came through the bay door, the same way it always has. I keep my father's letters in the top drawer of his desk, all 11 of them. I've read them so many times the pencil is starting to fade, so I made copies, but I keep the originals close. The last letter, letter 11, is my favorite. Not because of what it says about the shop or the will or my mother, because of the very last line. He wrote, "You were always the strongest one in the room, Claire Bear. Even when you were the only one in it." People ask me if I've forgiven my mother. Here's my honest answer. Forgiveness isn't something you hand out like a receipt. It's not something someone can demand from you because enough time has passed or because they showed up at your door looking smaller than you remember. Forgiveness is a door you open from the inside, when you're ready, if you're ever ready. And I'm not there yet. But I'm not angry anymore either. The anger burned itself out somewhere around year 4, when I realized I was carrying a weight that my mother had put down the moment I left town. She wasn't losing sleep. I was. So I set it down too. Not for her. For me. I don't hate my mother. I just don't trust her. And I've learned that those two things can exist in the same body without tearing you apart. If you're still here, and I hope you are, I want to tell you something I wish someone had told me at 25, standing in a parking lot after my father's funeral, holding a crumpled eulogy and wondering if I'd ever feel like I belonged anywhere again. You don't have to earn your place at the table. You don't have to perform, or prove, or shrink yourself into a shape that makes other people comfortable. If someone tells you that you don't belong, that says everything about their table and nothing about your worth. Build your own table. Set it for the people who show up without being asked. And leave an empty chair. Not for the ones who hurt you, but for the version of yourself who's still healing. She deserves a seat too. My name is Claire Whitfield. I'm 31. I'm a nurse practitioner who runs a free clinic on Wednesdays and an auto shop on Saturdays. I have a one-eared beagle named Biscuit, 11 letters from my father, and a bay door that's open every morning by 7. This was my story. Thank you for being here. If it stayed with you, I'd love to hear yours. Have you ever been erased by someone who was supposed to protect you? Have you ever rebuilt something they tried to take? Drop a comment. Hit subscribe if you haven't already. And check the description for more stories like this one. I'll see you next time. From Ridley Falls, wherever you are.